Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Cloverwood Senior Living, independent living in Pittsford, encouraging an active lifestyle, providing creative arts programming, woodland trails, and seasonal menus to support whole person wellness and growth. More online at cloverwood.org. And Nazareth University, presenting The Capital Fools, a musical parody ensemble featuring former members of political satirists The Capitol Steps, where no politician is safe from impressions and song spoofs, with 2 shows on New Year's Eve. More at naz.edu.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made when music was at its best in this country, when movies were the best, when restaurants and food were the best, when we had the most moral society and the least political division. When was that exactly? If I were to ask you, what was the peak of American television? The peak of American media? When were things the best? When were communities the strongest? For each of these questions, and the list is longer, by the way. We're going to get to the full list coming up. We'll ask you to share your thoughts on this. But for each question, there was a striking set of answers. Americans are generally convinced that the good old days were their teenage years. That's when music was the best, or food, or TV, or the movies. That's when neighborhoods were the strongest, when cities were the most fun to visit. But wait a moment. How can it be the teenage years for everybody? We all had different teenage years. That's the rub. YouGov in this poll found that no matter whether you're 30 or 50 or 80 years old, you think the peak of America was your teenage years. Why is that exactly? What is it about our teenage years that makes us want to go back? And for the listening audience today, do you agree that your teenage years was the peak of good everything? Let's get into it with our guest this hour. Tom Proietti was a teenager slightly before I was. Tom is with us in studio. Resident media scholar at St. John Fisher University and a teenager at heart.
Still, yes, absolutely.
It's lovely to see you.
Let's see, I'm trying to think when I turned 13. 1958.
Okay.
59.
So there you go. Late 50s, early to mid 60s.
Yes.
There's your teenagers.
Elvis Presley and the Beatles.
And our friend Norma Holland, a former journalist and comedian, one of the smartest people I know, is on the line with us too. Hello, my dear.
Hi, how are you, friend? And hi, so good to see you, Tom.
Hi, Norma.
I love you. I'm so happy to see you.
I love you and miss you.
And Norma, your teenage years were close to my teenage years. So
yeah,
we've got.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Should I say?
Well, Tom did, and he's older than you.
Yeah.
Okay, so like in 1990, two? I was how old was I when 1992? I'm asking me to do math here.
I was just going to say, we're not good at math. We're good at media.
You were 16.
Yeah, I was 16.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful, it was a wonderful time, right? I mean, you're young, you have, your joints don't ache, you can eat whatever you want, right? I mean, it was just a wonderful time.
I'm going to briefly ask you both. We're going to do it rapid fire, and then we're going to get into it. And listeners, it's kind of the same thing. So listeners, we're going to ask these questions. I want you thinking about how you would answer these questions. Because at the root of this is I have this theory, and my theory is that for current teenagers or current young 20-somethings, who unfortunately we don't have on this panel, I think they're going to be the outlier. I think they are more pessimistic than previous generations for a lot of reasons. Some of it's social media and how everybody thinks it's the worst time for everything. Okay, here we go. Tom Proietti, when would you say America had its most close-knit communities?
I don't think it ever really existed. I think it's a myth.
Ooh.
We fought a civil war in 1860, and there's always been great division. And one of the things I was thinking about as soon as you sent me this the other day and I started following and looking at this study was, I'll never forget in 3rd grade, some kid looked at me and called me a communist. And that was the height of the McCarthy era. We may have been really close-knit during World War. Well, I could have been. I don't know. No, I grew up in a business family. We were all registered Republicans. I was a registered Republican until 1996.
So you think this is a myth that in the good old days, everything was close-knit? I
used to tell my students all the time, if you talk to old people, every day is a good old day. because they're reminiscing, and you know what you do is you try. I think your mind is kind to you, and you try to put some of the worst things behind you, and you try to remember the positives. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. So as the United States, from what I understand, this is before I was born, but during World War II, appeared to be a nation really pulled together. We called them the greatest generation, and it was probably a suspension of time in many ways. I study media. It was a suspension of media too. We kind of just slowed everything down, and we tried to keep sending the same positive messages about the war.
And yet we still
and
had Jim Crow, and I mean it was hardly this utopia.
I didn't say we were honest. In fact, I think we were totally dishonest. In fact, one of the things I thought about immediately the other day was, and I don't want to jump too far and take too much of Norma's time too, but one of the most popular shows in the 1950s was Leave It to Beaver, and it's just awful. And it's just, I mean, it really is just freaking dreadful, and it's garbage. And I'll never forget my dad sitting there. When we lived in the city, I went to Benjamin Franklin High School. We didn't have a lot of money, but we weren't hungry. But my father used to sit there and laugh at it. He thought it was one of the most, that and Father Knows Best. And he used to boil it down to, just remember, white fathers always know the best.
Oh boy! Oh my God! Norma, that was Tom's rapid fire response. So,
I know it went on forever. Sorry.
Okay, what was the question again?
What was the question again? Yeah, there.
When did we have the most close-knit communities in this country?
Oh my gosh. And I feel like this is a very subjective question, okay? Because when I think back to, my childhood in the 1980s, and I say childhood because I was a teen in the 90s, but I was just a kid in the 80s. And, I feel like it's very subjective. And quite frankly, interestingly enough, I didn't think that life was the best as a teenager because I was seeing it through my own lens of a teenager. I was, 15, 16 years old, dealing with my own teenage drama, right? And what boy I had a crush on, and, who I wasn't friends with, or, some friend drama. But I really look back, I was 10 years old, Evan. I was 1985. I was in 5th grade at St. Margaret Mary Grammar School. Mrs. Sue Murray was my 5th grade teacher. And the music was the best. And I felt, Reagan was president. Mom and dad had good paying jobs. My mother worked in manufacturing, making parts for General Motors on Lyle Avenue in Rochester, and, making great money. And, that's, to me, all the people I loved were healthy and well. And so around me, and I never heard my parents complaining about society. It was always about some drama going on overseas. It wasn't about what was happening here in the United States. I feel like people were making money. There was more gainful employment. And yet life wasn't perfect, right? People were, overtly racist, but in ways that I didn't even recognize at the time, right? Because I was just a kid. So I feel like it's really very subjective.
All right, so we're going to get away from most close-knit communities because I'm going to take Tom and Norma's points there that one is going to be harder to pin down. There is really only one right answer for when was the best television. And let's see if Tom can get it.
It's right now.
No way.
Absolutely. This is the golden
You
age.
are a Seinfeld fan. You can't say now.
Well, Seinfeld that's a blip. The most consistently great television has happened since we started streaming. And the streamers, I mean, for one thing, Netflix and Amazon Prime especially opened up the Hollywood to so many other people who would have a chance to produce TV shows. And so we have these great series. Yeah, there is a series, or there's 2 series I'm going to mention that are 2 of the finest things I've ever seen in my life. One is called Maid, and the other one is The Queen's Gambit. Those would never run on network television. Never. The networks would never have allowed that kind of focus on a female, for one thing, and the quality of the writing. And, you have to understand another thing that was not reflected in this survey is in the 50s and 60s, we especially started loosening the moral grip that we had over media content. So and remember, Elvis Presley was controversial because he shook his hips. Think about that. And then we weren't allowed to say much of anything that might be offensive. You couldn't say pregnant on when Lucy was pregnant. You couldn't say
Mhm.
that on television. You couldn't play James Brown's music was not played on any Rochester radio stations till 1965. He already had 18 million sellers. And white Rochesterians didn't know who James Brown was. They didn't know who Red Fox was. I grew up with listening to Red Fox albums because my dad was a cool guy.
So,
So-
no, this is
So
to-
back to the great age
Yeah,
of
yeah,
television.
yeah.
It's right now.
So I'm going to agree with you with the caveat that in my mind I was thinking about network TV, like appointment TV, and because that still exists. I mean, people
Yeah.
And
often don't
most
consume
of it's
it
garbage.
that way.
Most of it's garbage.
And most of that, I think, is
Just trash.
absolute mess
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But I'm with you that if you include streaming, we're in a very different kind of an age and a possible golden age. I was just thinking any decade that had Cheers and Seinfeld premiere.
Yeah, but those are
Gotta
just
count there.
those are isolated programs. For the most part, the stuff that was around them,
Wasn't very good.
it was just dreadful. Dreadful,
Well-
and it was it was just kind of the same people over and over again, the same writers, the same themes, the same music. It just was we have released energy out there that we don't know how to control. Our kid, your 12-year-old,
Yeah.
he understands this, and he's growing up in that. I have 3 granddaughters. 2 are 19. One is 19, one is 20, and the other one's 22. When we have conversations about culture, about great TV, first off, they don't watch TV.
You're exactly right.
They don't watch TV.
No
or
chance.
if they do,
Yeah.
every once in a while, they might glance at something.
They don't
like-
even know that there is a 6 o'clock news.
No, they're by the way, they're better off for it.
Probably so.
I hate to say that to you, news people.
No,
but
listen, we
my career started in the
I'm
news.
not
You won't hear
offended
any
by that.
arguments from me.
I'm not
I don't
offended
let
by
my kids
that.
watch TV.
I'm not offended by that.
Yeah.
So,
No TV.
so Norma, when was the best TV in this country?
I mean, look, I'm just realizing my curling iron is in the background here. How about that? Okay, it was the 1980s again. I'm a big fan of the 80s. All right, look, we had, Give Me a Break with Nell Carter. A Black woman is the lead character, right? She was
Touché.
taking care of the chief's kids. And was a beloved character. I mean, there was also one of my huge favorites was a 70s, but I caught it in the 80s was Good Times, right?
Fantastic show.
Good Times. Yeah, that was a fantastic show. I tended to like shows that had a message, right? And that had very strong characters. But I mean, I remember Friday nights. I mean, I had to watch Emmanuel.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
really?
man.
And Mr. and Mrs. Papadopoulos, I mean, there was Alf. I mean, these are the things I grew up with.
That's
Look,
to
I'm
Tom's
telling
point.
you,
Ugh.
This
how
is
I
part
grew
of
up.
Norma
Okay.
I knew nothing
This is-
about, by the way.
Listen, I was a hardcore 80s kid. I loved all that stuff. But I'm gonna give Tom the nod because there's stuff today that we would never see. But I mean, all these shows. Listen, during COVID, I decided I was only gonna watch stuff that made me was like from the wholesome era, right? To me, was the 80s, right? Here I go watching Little House on the Prairie, although that was kind of straddled the 70s and 80s. And they were dealing with racism, slavery, child abuse, all these pandemics. They were dealing with all these topics on that show. So it's interesting to me that some of the stuff that we thought was also idyllic of that time, they were dealing with the very same issues that we are more overt about today. So I think the 80s were a shifting time, and we were talking about teen pregnancy on some of these shows and things. So it's really interesting. But for me, I loved TV in the 80s. I was also watching MTV. And let me just say that RIP, rest
R.I.P.
in peace.
MTV.
RIP MTV, but I was a huge MTV had a massive influence on me. Massive. I would come home every day after school and I'd watch MTV.
So I have
After I
to
did
tell
my
you, from 1980 to 1985, most people equate me with being an academic. I was the vice president of marketing for the company today that is Spectrum. It was called Greater Rochester Cablevision then. I was there, Norma, the night we flipped on MTV. And then the first day it was on, I drove home to my beautiful little suburban home in Rochester, or actually in Brighton, and I pulled in the driveway. And my wife walked out, poor Donna, she walked out of the house because we were the only house on the street that had cable and had MTV. And there were something like 14 kids in our living room
All the kids on the street
watching
were
this.
there.
And she came out and she looked at me and she goes, "You've created a monster."
Oh boy.
because MTV was a game changer. And think about that.
I mean,
MTV jumped outside of the network. It was no
Video
longer.
Killed the Radio Star. Remember that? There's a
Yeah,
song,
it was
there's
the
a
first
song called
it was
Video
the first
Killed the
thing that
Radio
was
Star.
on. Yes.
Yeah,
It-
I remember that vividly,
That
right?
was
And that was such a great,
12,
it was the
1201
best.
on August 26th,
Kids today, they
1981.
can have whatever they want whenever they want it. Norma had to wait all night for them to show that aha video. She wanted
Oh my
Take on
gosh.
Me. Come on.
great.
Take on me.
Here it comes.
Take on me.
Okay, here,
you
see,
know,
look what
I
we've
mean,
done.
She's talented.
I mean,
though.
don't. I challenge you. I challenge anyone to try. Doug Emblidge used to try and do this during commercial break. He'd try to like name a song and see if I knew who the singer was. I'm like, duh,
Norma and I
Johnny
used to
Meets
sing
Jazz.
John Cicada and Michael McDonald
Oh
songs
my
during the break.
goodness.
Anyway,
Can
if we're
you
not
get-
careful, you're about to sing some more Michael
Come on,
McDonald
dude.
right now.
Come
No,
on.
my
No,
goodness.
I really want to hear
gracious.
John Cicada more than
John Cicada. Yeah, there we go. Well, I think we've got, let's see here. First phone call. Let me grab a couple calls before we move through this list here of questions. Dorothy in Rochester. Hi, Dorothy. Go ahead.
Hi. I was raised in New York, and in the 60s, I was 13 years old, and there was racism rampant in the city, and I went to a school where they eventually did bus people of color into our school district, but we had a teacher who moved into our neighborhood who was African American, and they burned a cross on his lawn, and the Vietnam War was going on, and a friend of mine's brother died in the war. It was a time of unrest, and then you had, just people being nasty to other people. If you walked in their neighborhood, if a person of color walked through our neighborhood, they would throw rocks at them.
Amen, Dorothy.
So it wasn't a good time.
I went to Benjamin Franklin High School, and I'll never forget my first day there in 7th grade. I had gone to 39 schools in the city, and I was going to go to McQuaid. I passed the test, and my father wouldn't let me go to McQuaid. My mother wanted me to go. And my dad said to me, he said, if the world was only Catholics, I would endorse this. He said, but last I checked, it's not. He said, you're going to learn to grow up with how to live with everyone. You're going to go to Franklin High School. And yeah, I was there, and you want to talk some of the best years of my life. And I met Donna Sortino there, and we've been together 64 years. Was it a great time in American history? No, I mean the things Dorothy just mentioned. The racism, and I went to a school finally with a group of Jewish kids. The anti-Semitism that existed was just astonishing, and this was right after World War II. And I'll never forget people walking down the hall who were not Jewish, making jokes about Adolf Eichmann, and that they didn't turn the furnace up high enough to get rid of all of them. I remember things like that.
You would
thinking,
hear stuff like that.
oh,
Disgusting, yeah.
absolutely! It was just astonishing. And then the constant barrage of war. If you pay any attention to the history of the United States, 1959, Dwight Eisenhower gave this speech that my father made the three of us watch because it was the warning about the military-industrial complex. And my father said, now that we came out of World War II and we think we're the most powerful nation in the world, the military thinks they can solve everything. And guess what? We've been at war ever since, constantly. Now look what we're doing off the coast of Venezuela right now. We're using weaponry, and then somehow or other we've started marketing that just because you're doing military service, you're a hero. That's garbage. That's just...
Well, listen, I want to pull it back to something that Dorothy is, I think, very appropriately reminding us, which is just about any time when you were a teenager, whoever is hearing the sound of my voice right now, whenever you were a teenager, something was happening that would have caused division, angst, danger. To me, the most insulated time, objectively, this is the time that I grew up with in the 90s. The 90s was probably the most insulated. Communism had just fell. The Soviet Union had broken up. The concern about nuclear war that had been there for decades was mostly gone. We didn't have any drills where we're hiding under desks in the 1990s. That didn't happen. Columbine school shooting hadn't happened yet. It wasn't the first school shooting, but it opened a new era. That was at the end of the decade. So the 90s was pretty insulated. I'm not saying it was perfect, not at all. But I'm saying that when you compare 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, there's the 9/11 and the aughts. There's so much that you could look back to and say, wait a second, how could you have been optimistic? all of these things were happening. Here's what I want to get to and ask both of my guests about. Why are we nostalgic then for our teenagers? Silver Magazine interviewed psychotherapist Cameron Cower, who said the following: "It's common for people to perceive the past as a simpler, better time, regardless of whether that perception is accurate or not. This can happen when the brain forgets the challenges and complexities of the past, remembering and focusing only on the positives. And we feel nostalgia for a time when we were experiencing a sense of possibility about our own lives, which is why our teenage years are such a nostalgia trigger." End quote. So what she's really saying there is, if you went through your teenage years when the world was in turmoil, but you thought, my future is I'm optimistic about my future. There's all these things I can accomplish, I can achieve.
Yeah.
My 20s are coming, then my 30s, and I'm excited about that. I think what's happening now is, I think social media and the current generation, and this is reflected in surveys, is the first who really feels like it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse for a lot of reasons, and that is not a healthy place for kids to be. It's not a healthy place for teenagers and young adults to be. I'm very worried about that. But Norma, when you think about your teenagers, like your point about the 80s, there was plenty of things. I think your sister had mentioned there was an AIDS scare.
Yeah.
There was all things happening.
I was just going to
Oh
say
my
it.
gosh.
That was on our
The
minds.
80s,
AIDS.
I mean, it was terrifying. You know,
Yes, it
you
was.
had Princess Diana kissing AIDS patients. You know, you were afraid to even, but AIDS was a massive, you know, fear in our society. And let me just be very crystal clear. I may have, you know, gone to, I loved my Catholic school growing up. I went to Catholic school. You can call me sheltered, whatever you want. My parents made choices, and I'm proud of those choices that they made. But here's the thing, you know, the first person to call my sister the N-word happened in Catholic school.
Wow.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, a boy told my sister, he called her the N-word, and I approached the father on the playground and told him, your son called my sister. I was 12 years old. You called my sister, you know, he called my sister. No, he didn't. Never would call him that. He never said that. I'll never forget, I confronted this grown man on the playground, okay? And guess what happened? 20 years later, this young child apologized to my sister.
Wow.
You know? So look at some of the worst and most overt racist things happened to us in the 80s. I mean, let's just be very real. You know, again, I had a loving grade school community, wonderful teachers, and some of the, you know, no one is sheltered. No one got through the 80s unscathed. Okay. And same with 90s, because I also, you know, my first heartbreak was a boy who told me he couldn't date me because I wasn't white. That was 1991.
Wow.
You know,
But you were
And
optimistic about your
literally
own future at the
broke my
time,
heart.
weren't you?
Yes, I was. I was optimistic because I knew that this wasn't all that there was to be. I knew that there
Right.
was a future for me elsewhere. And then something else, Evan, I think we need to also say this. I trusted the adults in my world to make good choices for me.
Oh, boy,
I
that's a
trusted
big
even our
point.
president at the time to make good choices for our future as Americans. That's what I firmly believed. And my parents inculcated that in me, right? You can trust the people around you to make good choices. I trusted the adults. Now, I want to tell you, I spoke to a colleague of mine who's 28 years old. She said, Norma, I was born in 1997. 4 years later is 9/11. Then what happens? Then you have then you've got, you know, the recession, right? In the
Great
the
Recession,
mid to late.
2007,
And then,
2008.
How about
exactly.
Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, she goes, what about the war in Iraq? So there was all this stuff going on. And I said, wow. I said, so do you have hope for the future? She goes, well, I have hope in organizations and in people that are doing good work today. She goes, but I don't have a lot of optimism about the future. This is my 28-year-old colleague.
I mean, that should break our hearts. But I want to emphasize a point that Norma just made there, and I want to hear Tom on this one. What you said was, growing up in the 80s into the 90s, you and your parents, no matter how you felt and no matter how your parents voted, you felt like, okay, we're having elections. Even if it doesn't go the way I want, we're going to be okay. Okay, we're having elections. At least it's adults. At least we've got adults in the room. At least we can trust them to have the best interests for our future. Even if even if you're a Republican and a Democrat wins, or if you're a Democrat and a Republican wins, you felt like this is not existential. That dividing line has been shattered, and that is not a healthy place to be. I don't think it's sustainable to be in that place, Norma.
I agree. And the sad thing is, I refrain from speaking about politics too much in front of my children. I have small children, okay? But they're forming their opinions about the world through the things that I say, my husband and I say. So we're very cautious about how we speak about the world around us, and we try to speak about it. We don't cover we don't hide the truth though, right? We tell them about what's going on in the world. But of course I filter it because I'm their mother and I have to do that, okay? But I want them to know, right? But I don't want them to be so pessimistic about the people around them,
Right.
right? That their teachers aren't going to make good choices for
Right.
them. Which isn't to say, again, I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything for my kids, but yeah. So it's my mom and dad at least knew. They said, it was this feeling of the adults in the room will make good choices for us, right?
Well,
And yeah.
well,
That's a great line, by the way. The adults.
So
in the
let me
room.
ask you something, Tom.
Yeah.
You were alive and living
Still
through.
am too. I think. Let me do it.
Alive and kicking.
You were cognizant at a time before Norma and I came along, and a lot of people today talk about we're in unprecedented times, never been this bad. And then I hear people say, we had bombings in the 60s.
Oh, absolutely.
It was horrific. There were riots at political conventions. Do you think we were more divided politically in the 60s or now?
I think it's a constant of American history. Did you watch Ken Burns at all? I know.
Yeah. I
mean,
have not seen that whole series.
the American Revolution. I haven't seen the whole thing, but it's a constant thread throughout our history that we've not just been divided. We're uneven. We say a lot of things in public, and then in our personal lives we don't practice them nearly as much. It's kind of like the folks who go to church on Sunday, and I hear about these. My father used to say this all the time too, and he was not a religious person. He used to say the SOBs. They go into the parking lot and then they go inside church and they're reverential for an hour, and then they come out and beat the crap out of each other, and they curse while they're driving, and they treat waiters and waitresses like crap. He owned a restaurant, so, and there was a lot of truth to that. It's been a constant thread through the history of the United States, and it's one that we haven't examined honestly. This is what Ken Burns really does for us. This is one of the things one of the reasons why I'm a massive supporter of what you folks do here. You're a game changer, Evan. Every day you change who we are. You show us our community. You showed us so much about our community. You and Megan and Julie. It's astonishing to me that we're not doing much better because we are.
Are you fundamentally? You strike me as one of the most optimistic people I've ever met. You're one of the most positive people to be around.
Thanks.
That I've ever known.
It's the drugs.
It is not the drugs.
We should be pouring Zoloft into Cobb's Hill Reservoir.
I was texting with somebody yesterday about a totally different subject, and I said to this person, "Can you help me get so and so on the show? I'm only asking because I figured you know everybody." And you know what this person said, not knowing you were coming on the show today? Well, you and I both know Tom Proietti, and that's good enough.
Yeah.
This is a person I was like, oh, Tom's coming on tomorrow. So I want to ask you, the way you are talking about American eras, I think is realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But it strikes me as slightly more downcast than I would expect from you. Do you think human beings are fundamentally good or fundamentally bad, or neither?
No, I don't think. I think for the most part we're fairly good, probably 60-40. But left to our own device. I mean, you behave differently too if you're hungry. You behave so differently depending on your circumstances. I was never hungry once in my life, but I'll never forget at Franklin High School meeting kids who came not just from the inner city either. This was,
Sure.
It was my first real brush with human poverty. We used to drive through poverty. So my dad would say, "This is where poor people live." We drive through poverty. And then all of a sudden I went to this public high school and I realized people around me didn't have any food to eat. And if I were in that scenario, would I go steal food? You're damn right I would.
Sure.
I would go steal food.
100%.
And then
feed your kids.
But what did we do to those people? We put them in jail.
And we judge them.
Did we put Richard Nixon in jail for what he did? No. We gave passes. I mean, Trump's doing it right now with the pardons. And so we've always given passes to the people in power, and we've decided, the war on drugs. The war on drugs is the biggest joke in the world. The war on drugs was was instituted by a group of alcoholics who were protecting that industry. It didn't take a genius to figure that out, but that never made the nightly news.
So you're in the George Carlin camp of humanity.
Yes, absolutely. George Carlin and Richard Pryor.
George Carlin and Richard Pryor.
And then the first comedian I ever brought to St. John Fisher, because the president of the college, Charles J. Lavery, he asked me when I joined the faculty, and there were only 37 of us on the faculty, and I was the only one who was not religiously connected. He said, "Can you help me make St. John Fisher College cool?" And I said, "Charlie, we should start bringing in some good speakers." And he said, "You have one in mind?" I said, "Yeah, Dick Gregory." And he goes, "Dick Gregory, he just ran for president, right?" And I said, "Yeah, and he's a stand-up comedian." I said, "But he has more soul than any human being I've ever met." And he goes, "You mean like a music soul?" And I said, no, like soul. And I brought Dick Gregory to St. John Fisher to about 1,800 people, and he changed a whole bunch of lives in one night. He changed my life. I picked him up at the airport, and just driving in the car, I'll never forget going home and telling my wife, I said, I drove in a car with Dick Gregory, and he is truly one of the most human, radiant creatures I've ever met in my life. And then he captivated 1,800 people with honesty that was just, it tore my heart
See,
out.
that's the duality I love about you. You can be honest and brutal about the reality of people while still being a ray of
By the way,
actual sunshine
you
yourself.
mentioned George Carlin. One of my students was George's manager for a while, Jeff Abrahamian, Fisher grad. And I used to ask him, and also I had a chance once when I was doing some work for HBO to meet George Carlin. He was doing a concert up at the Rogers Center for HBO. And I was just hoping that there was a kind side to George, but there wasn't. He was really angry.
Oh, boy.
And Richard Pryor was the same way. These guys were really, really angry human beings. And I wasn't around them all the time, but Jeff Abrahamian told me, he said, George Carlin, it's an angry, angry guy. He said that humor comes almost all from anger. It's not, and there's not a really, and then I got to meet his daughter, Kelly. And Kelly said, my father was a real troubled soul. And he was. I'm not that way. I'm not nearly as troubled.
No, but you appreciate some of the philosophy that came through in
Oh,
his
gosh.
comedy.
Yes. Oh,
And
geez,
Norma sounds like you too.
I would never say you or Tom Peretti is troubled. I think I would say you are very optimistic, but honest. And I think that's, you know what? I always say, when you love someone, you tell them the truth, right?
Amen. There you
tell
do.
them the truth because you love them, right? So you're going to tell them the truth. I love that. I love that. It's so interesting. I think people are good. When I used to, when I was a street reporter and I would, interview people, I would go up to people who looked like they looked standoffish. They don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. And some of the best interviews I got were people who, were not people that you would have thought, I'm going to go up, if it wasn't for my camera and
Right.
my Channel 13 jacket, I would go up and talk to. Nicest people ever. And I was proven time and again that at their core, I think, but I also want to give a nod to what Tom said. When people are not hungry, they're not desperate. And so, this is why we need to feed people and make sure that they have gainful employment and have the basic necessities of life and take care of them in that way. But that's a whole other topic.
And
But
Norma
my
and
point
Evan,
is,
real quickly, I'm going to ask you too, is when you got back to do the story, did you keep the kind people in the story, or did you keep the ones who were barking like dogs?
Tom, that's a whole other topic.
I know
because
it is.
I was very cognizant of the way I portrayed people, right? And I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure that I normalized being.
Yeah.
But you also
and this
you
is,
also
I'm going
knew
off on a
that
tangent, but
you also knew that the
normalized, things.
consultants were going to tell you, make sure you put the barking dogs on there who are angry, because that's the stuff
No,
that-
Tom. The consultants were more concerned about what I did with my hair
With
and
your
whether
hair,
or not I
well,
was
amen.
wearing shapewear underneath my suit.
Yeah,
So,
the
yeah.
few
Gosh.
months I
Don't put
worked at
that
Channel
out there.
13,
gosh.
one of my former students, Wanda Miller, I'll never forget, and you
Wanda,
both,
yes.
you know Wanda. She was one of my students.
Yes,
She used to
we do.
babysit my kids, and
She-
I'll never forget
She's a
Wanda.
pioneer, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll never forget Dick Burt going in to meet with the consultants, and he comes walking out after 5 minutes, and they told him everything was fine, even though he was grossly overweight. He was sarcastic. He was whatever. And then Wanda went in there. She was in there for about 45 minutes, and she came out, and she was so angry because all they did is pick on her about her hair, about the eye makeup, about this, that. and it had nothing to do with the quality of the journalism. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, but again, most of the viewers know nothing about that background of what's going on, and that's the tragedy of not teaching media literacy. We're the only major nation in the world that does not teach media literacy, and until we do, we will never be completely honest with ourselves.
Okay, so here's what I got to do. Hoover, I'm going to take. I got a couple phone calls we're going to take on the other side of this break. So let's take this break. We'll take some phone calls, and if you're just tuning in and you're like, what are they talking about today? I'm not even really sure anymore, but it might be the best conversation of the year. That's just how it goes when you've got Norma Holland and Tom Proietti on. We were inspired to talk by a new poll from the Washington Post and YouGov that found that most Americans point to their teenage years in a very nostalgic way, thinking that things were better in almost every category. Literally the food, the television, the movies, the music, the strength of communities, the morality of government. People tend to think, well, it was much better in my teenage years when I was growing up, because people think apparently about our teenage years at a time when we were optimistic about a lot of things, that we had a lot of our future still left to live, that we thought things could only get better, and that maybe things would be more hopeful. And we're talking about what that means in a lot of different contexts here. And Tom and Norma are helping steer that ship. We're going to take your phone calls and emails on the other side of this break.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Freed Maxick, now part of Witham, a national advisory and public accounting firm. The local team continues its decades-long commitment to serving Western New York with advisory, tax, and assurance services. More at witham.com.
Joel writes in to say Dick Gregory predicted the bombing of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in his 1972 book.
Yes, he did.
Dick Gregory's Political Primer. Wow.
Yeah, it's a great read.
Oh, my.
Dick Gregory
I didn't know that
deserves
story.
Dick Gregory deserves so much more audience. And by the way, the great Ed Sullivan did give us Dick Gregory on a fairly regular basis. And if you haven't seen the Ed Sullivan documentary that's on Netflix, it is spectacular, because this guy snuck in more pucks than Wayne Gretzky did into the American psyche. He got us to start paying attention to things, and most of us didn't know that. So now most of our media has been sanitized. You talk about movies. I hate to say this, but the greatest movies are made after 1960. No doubt about it. Once the MPAA rating system started to fall away and people started cursing in movies and dealing with topics that were real topics, the movies improved dramatically.
I'm scandalized. I'm
You're
absolutely scandalized.
scandalized.
Steve in Honeyway Falls says, I've had so much fun playing at retirement homes for the past 50 years. 50 years ago, the requests were for Bye Bye Blackbird, later songs from the American Songbook. Today, requests come for the Beatles or the Stones. My point is, all through these 50 years, the songs loved and remembered were from those when the senior citizens were in their teenage
Oh, yeah, I
years.
think he's absolutely right.
That's
Yeah.
me.
Sure.
I agree.
There you go.
Nos-
I agree.
Nostalgia.
I was thinking about that, like I was 16 years old, and I remember the other day I posted something. It was from a group called PM Dawn, and
Yes,
Set
yes.
Adrift on Memory Bliss of You,
Yes.
which was a riff on Spandau Ballet
Yes, it
from
was.
from the
I
1980s.
slow danced to that song at a school dance, I'm pretty sure.
I did too, Evan. I did too.
Just stay far
mean,
apart. I
all
want to be
up
able to
on
fit a
them,
whole
too.
human being in between us. When you and I are dancing,
No,
Norma.
you had to leave room for the Holy Spirit, is what you had
That's
to do.
right.
'cause
The
that's
Holy
what I was
Spirit's
told.
got to be between
The
us.
Holy
the whole
Spirit.
Spirit.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Let me get Hoover.
Takes me back though.
All right.
I get dreamy. Like, oh.
All right, Hoover in Pittsford is on the phone. Hello, Hoover. Go ahead.
Hello, Evan. I got to tell you, I'm going to do a quick listener's audit of your program.
No.
Probably.
Should I hide
probably-
under the table?
Yeah, Proietti, you probably should, and you should probably button your strap for a while, because we started out this program talking about what our teenage years or what our best time of our life were. So I was listening with hope, but it turned into, from the Evan Dawson show, it turned into the Proietti
Oh.
political information show.
Oh.
And, I don't enjoy that. I wanted to call in and tell you about, I went to City High School, and my experience is far different than I heard from Proietti talking about his Benjamin Franklin debacle.
It wasn't a
I had
debacle. Those are some of the best years of my life.
All right, go ahead, Hoover.
Oh, well, you never said that. And the topic is the best years of our life. Okay. I had to put up with almost being drafted for Vietnam for about 5 years. I had to go to the draft board 4 times to keep my deferment. Was that the best time of my life? No, it was the worst time of my life. My best friend was killed in Vietnam, and I've written a novel about the boys in my group who all had the same experiences, whether they went in the military or not. And Evan, I'm going to drop a copy of that off for you, and you can read about it.
Yeah,
Hoover, can I buy one from you? And I mean that seriously. Where can I get it?
Well, I'll drop it off for Evan. And
I'll share it there. Go ahead.
Okay,
Hoover.
he'll share it with
Yeah.
you. Okay, thanks.
My experience has been when I had a good job and my kids were little, and I bought my first house on the money that I had saved myself, and it happened to coincide with the end of the Watergate era and the end of the Vietnam after hangover, and a guy named Reagan came in and he started talking positive instead of all the crap that was happening in the country. So I like to be positive, and I'm auditing you because I felt that your program started out with an opportunity to talk about our experiences, but it went into the Proietti show. So anyway, I'm not very happy about this. And normally I love your show, Evan, but today I'm kind of pissed off. Anyway.
All right. Well, Hoover, listen, I can't hit it out of the park all the time, as you know, and some things are not for everybody. I will say this. Tom's invited on this program because, number one, he's got more knowledge in his brain, well, a small region of his brain than I would have in multiple lifetimes, but also because Tom is one of the more optimistic people I've ever met, as I said.
I am absolutely
But he's
optimistic.
also willing to be honest. And the thing that I find really interesting is Tom does not buy this idea that things were just better in the past, or that they were always better in the past, no matter what. So I thought that would make for some interesting conversation and a chance to zero in on that. Now, listen, Tom, do you want to make amends here? You got some apologizing.
No,
to
I'm
do.
actually going to tell Hoover about something that happened in my personal life. I grew up in a house where my dad was a great athlete, and he taught his 3 sons to be great athletes. We had a basketball net, so we always had guys over playing basketball, and we played a lot of games. And I'll never forget this one day. My good friend, who was almost like my stepfather, the late Leonard Butch Johnson, who was a city cop for about 40 years and passed away about 2 years ago. But Leonard and a whole bunch of us, he was a black kid, and about 10 of us who went inside the house. My mother had made cake and cookies for us, and there was a lady there who was very close to our family. And when my mom was cleaning up after we went back outside to play basketball again, this is probably 1958, 59, my mother's friend said to my mother, "So you're going to throw out all those utensils that the black ones ate from, aren't you?"
Oh my God.
And my mother said, "You have to leave my house right now." So, Hoover, you grew up probably in a kinder place than I did, and one of the things that my parents did for me was to point out that there was an awful lot of injustice that just didn't make any sense, and that a lot of what we saw was just kind of sanitized. So, especially my dad. My dad was very active politically. He was a registered Republican. He loved a guy named Frank Horton. In fact, so did I, and he was a Republican congressman. And my life has been very much a charm, what Hoover just described. I remember going through those things with the draft board and the thrill of buying a first home, the thrill of 2 kids coming into my life and 4 grandbabies coming into my life. My life has been an absolute charm. Right now I'm facing a health issue that's terrifying me. And people say to me, "Well, geez, they're going to fix it." And they're well, maybe they're not. And guess what? I have no regrets because no one could have lived a better life than I've lived.
Oof.
I've been so charmed. Yeah.
All right, let me grab. This is Greg in San Diego. Hey, Greg, go ahead.
Greg in San Diego.
Hi. Well, I graduated at Aquinas Institute in 1970. My older brother graduated Fisher in 1969. He may be about the age as Proietti.
He was probably in my class. I started teaching there in
he,
'68.
he knows. He knows you somehow. I don't know you were good friends or not. I don't. But he knows your name and site. Anyway, the '60s were, in my opinion, cut into 3 pieces. In the beginning, you had the king and queen of Camelot beginning. The
Yes.
sky was the limit, going to the moon. there was no wars going on. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was in grammar school when we all thought, would we make it through to the night? Would nuclear war, occur? But those early years, everyone wanted to go to college. People tried their best in high school to get into the colleges that they wanted to. Newspapers, DNC, the Times Union, on the network TV, NBC, ABC, you had Walter Cronkite, Uncle Walter. He was the fountain of truth. Huntley Brinkley. People trusted media in those days. Then as you got into the mid-'60s, you had John Kennedy shot. You had Martin Luther King shot. Robert Kennedy shot. Malcolm X shot. I lived in a neighborhood at that time in East Elmhurst where his house was bombed. And I recall the night he was assassinated in Harlem. So at that point, it goes from the American dream into the American nightmare with Vietnam. Just, Johnson made the Vietnam War, 600,000 troops in Vietnam. And suddenly all that magic of the mid-'60s, of the love generation, make love, not war, live the American dream, ended.
Well, Greg, I mean, I totally understand that point. And again, that's why I think it's important not just to romanticize, but to be real about it.
Right. And Greg, you just were very real
that's
about
right.
it.
It's exactly right.
You were tearing my heart out. I was in a newsroom at Channel 3 in Syracuse the night Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I'll never forget the engineer walking into the room saying, well, they finally shot the coon.
Oh my God!
And and I almost
Jeez.
killed him.
Yeah.
It was just
That's terrible.
one of the most brutal moments of my life.
That's terrible.
And here but the other side of that is, as Evan says, and as Norma knows, they know I'm an optimistic person. I'm really happy with my life. I shoveled 4 driveways today, and I kept looking behind me, looking at my house backs into Durand Eastman Park, and I said, who made me this lucky? Who gave me Donna Sortino? Benjamin Franklin High School did, and Lewis and Donna Sortino Sr. Yeah, my life has been a charm. But that's what life is. Life is it's an up and it's a down and it's an up and it's a down.
Yeah,
and personal life is a lot different than societal life.
Elijah on YouTube says, really enjoyed the show. As someone who just left their teenage years, I totally agree with the sentiment that those are the good old days. I wish we had more optimism for the future nowadays. So let's have a little fun to finish here. Norma Holland, the best fashion. When was the best fashion? Now that's a little bit more, that's easier. Come on. Best fashion.
Fashion? Oh, come on, man. The 80s were the best. When you took your jeans and you tagged them, okay, and you rolled them up,
Yes.
and then you put your socks and scrunched them, and you wore your white Reeboks. I mean, come on.
It looks so fly.
I was fly. I was not. I was such a geek. I had no. No.
But did you?
I watched everyone else do it though.
Did you think you were fly?
Of course, I thought I was so cool. I mean, we all did, right?
I don't know.
We
I
wore
had a
our
hypercolor
gummy
shirt,
bracelets
and I thought I was just kind of posing with the hypercolor
Wait,
shirt.
hold up. What? You had a what?
I had a hypercolor shirt, the kind that changes colors with heat. So if you press your hand on it, it changed colors. That was the innovation of the 90s. My guess is that probably a single shirt probably ruined a landfill, is my guess. But it was a cool thing at the time. Reebok pumps, I thought that was cool,
pumps.
So the 80s for you, and I think we've all agreed we are in the best food era right now, the best dining era. That's now.
100%.
We all agree that TV, streaming, best it's been. I'm worried about the movies, music. I don't know. That's all subjective. But Norma, give me one thing, one moment or one habit in your life, because nobody, no matter how old you are, nobody is going to get to the end of their life and be like, I wish I would have doom scrolled on Facebook and Twitter more. I wish I would have spent more time on social media. What do you look back and say, if I had one more day, this is what I would have been doing. This was the best.
Back in the day, yeah. Sitting at the table with John and Lucy and Andrea on a Sunday morning, reading the newspaper and talking to one another, and mom and dad looking at the news, commenting, and all of us just talking and being together. Again, I look back on the good old days as the days when my family and everyone in it were alive and well, and I was a kid and all was right with the world. And I'm trying to make that for my kids now.
Tom Proietti, you got one day to go back and do again. What's it going to be?
Well, it's 2 days. It'd be a day in June in 1972 and a day in October in 1975. My uncle was an obstetrician. He delivered both of my children. And he was so emotional about delivering my children. I thought it was just my children either, but when I found out from the nurses, he teared up with every baby that was born.
Oh, you thought, yeah.
And this was my uncle. But I'll never forget
though.
that he held Amy in his hands. Amy's now 53 years old. Held Amy in his hands, and he looked at me and he goes, "Isn't this a miracle?" And I thought he was talking about just my daughter, but he was talking about human life, and that it's a miracle and it's a gift. And we have to make the best out of it. And, we're trying.
I think I'll close with this thought.
What was your best day?
Oh, boy.
Ay.
Oh, Evan, come on.
In my childhood, we really did have a creek in the backyard, and we'd catch crayfish in the creek.
Wow, how cool.
And we invented wiffle ball stadiums. You could have the smallest lot on the street, and we would find a way to turn it into a little wiffle ball field.
Isn't that fabulous?
And we just everywhere we went, that's what we did all summer long, and just it was absurd. But that's it really was a ride bikes and come back at dinner kind of a childhood, and I was very, very fortunate. You talk about hitting the lottery. I've hit the lottery in so many different ways in my life. I still feel like that right now today.
So
but for
I.
anybody who thinks that anything was overly negative. About
Just
this program.
Hoover's the only one.
Well, but
I'm gonna go hug
But
him.
listen, everybody's it's okay. It's okay.
Fight.
And no, there's no fight. It's
No,
okay.
no.
I'm
But
gonna give him a hug.
but I will say, I think it is valuable. If you're going to be optimistic about the future, you've got to be real about your past. Otherwise you're going to repeat it. And I appreciate being real about the past. That's why I think Ken Burns' Revolutionary War series was real, and I also think it was an act of patriotism to make that series. Hey, Tom Proietti,
Involved,
I
by
love
the
you,
way.
brother.
I
Great
love you,
seeing
buddy.
you.
I love you.
I love you.
Happy
I
holidays.
love you.
I
Tom
love you, Norma
Ferretti.
I
Holland.
love you, Norma Holland.
I love you.
I love you, Tom, and I love you, John. I love you, Evan. Love
All
you,
right,
John
everybody.
Boy.
We love everybody.
Peace,
Have a
love, and
great day.
linguine.
Talk with you tomorrow.
I love you, Hoover.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.